Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 48, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. Happy National Sewing Month! The month of September is National Sewing Month, as decreed by President Reagan in 1982, in recognition of the importance of home sewing to our nation. National Sewing Month is presented by the Sewing and Craft Alliance in conjunction with participation from the American Sewing Guild. And I will put links to the websites for the various organizations and the website for National Sewing Month. The 2024 theme is Sew Sustainable, highlighting the creative ways sewing enthusiasts are working to reduce, reuse, and recycle in their sewing projects. September is also the month for Project Dress a Girl that is hosted and was started by Mari Sews on YouTube, and I will put the link to her channel as well and the information. If you have anything else that you think I should highlight this month for National Sewing Month, drop me a note and let me know. I didn't release a podcast last week because I've been traveling. My older daughter lives in Ketchikan, Alaska with her husband, and the reason that they are there is because he is the dentist at the Coast Guard station. He got that job right out of dental school in March of 2021, and they have been there since then. She works as an occupational therapist with pediatric clients, and a lot of her clients are Native Alaskans, part of the Native Alaskan population. This was my fourth trip to Ketchikan. I went there in 2009 when J.C. Breyer and I taught on a Craft Cruises Alaskan knitting cruise. We stopped in Ketchikan, and I've also been there 3 times now since my kids moved up there. You may have seen on the news that Ketchikan had a landslide. That happened about 4 hours after we flew back to Seattle on Sunday. I had gone to Ketchikan with my younger daughter and her boyfriend to visit her sister, and we flew out at noon on Sunday, and the landslide happened about 4:30 on Sunday afternoon. It had started raining overnight, and I don't know if you've ever been to that part of Alaska, but they get a tremendous amount of rain, and it all comes in a short period of time. There was a lot of wind. That was probably the bumpiest plane ride I've ever taken in my entire life, flying out of Ketchikan. And the combination of the wind and the rain and the fact that Ketchikan hadn't had much rain in August resulted in that fatal landslide. My daughter and her husband live at the south end of the island, so they weren't directly affected, but she does work in town and he works at the Coast Guard station, and they knew quite a number of people who were in that landslide zone. So I would ask for your continued thoughts and prayers for those people as they clean up and try to recover from this, and let's pray that there aren't any more landslides. From my previous visits to Ketchikan, I knew that there was a small yarn store called Untangled Yarn and Fiber. I didn't get to visit that store this time. There's also a quilt store there called the Whale's Tail, and unfortunately, it was closed on the day that we were downtown shopping. We went down on Saturday to take my younger daughter's boyfriend to the Lumberjack show, which we've all seen before, but he's never been to Alaska. So we decided to go to the Lumberjack show, and a Whale's Tail is right next door, but unfortunately they weren't open. Even though their hours said they were open, for some reason they were closed that day. I know those stores in Ketchikan really struggled during the pandemic. I went to Ketchikan in May of 2021, right after my kids moved up there, and I went to a Whale's Tail then, and their stock was severely depleted because it's hard to get stock shipped to Alaska, and then to add a global pandemic and freight shortages on top of it. But they've managed to stay open. I really was hoping to get in there this time, but I didn't. I did go to Fabulous Fiber Arts and More, which is in the Creek Street shopping area. And I have also been to this store before. It's a darling little store, and it's divided into 2 rooms. The first room, when you first walk in, has a lovely, well-curated selection of yarn. And as a former knitting designer, I will never be able to knit all the yarn that I have before I die, so I don't tend to buy yarn when I'm traveling. But the back room had lots of 1-yard cuts of fabrics that were specific to Alaska and to Native peoples. There is an artist who lives in Anchorage now named Barbara LaValle. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I'll put a link to her website as well. She designs fabrics for Northcott Fabrics, and I picked up 2 1-yard cuts of some of her fabric. Again, I will put all the links in the show notes for you. I confess that I am not unhappy that summer is over. There's a reason I live in Montana, and it's not because I like hot weather. The problem I have with summer in Montana is that everything gets crammed into 3 short months. So things that might happen over 6 months in other parts of the country get compressed, and everything happens in June, July, and August. We've also been inundated with tourists over the last couple of years, and while I understand that tourism is great for our economy, our infrastructure really isn't built to support the influx of that many people. And to be honest, I have never seen such awful driving as I see from the tourists over the summer here. So it's kind of a two-edged sword. I really try not to go to town unless I can go early in the morning, because it's just nuts. Things do tend to slow down after Labor Day weekend, and I'm looking forward to the pace slowing down a bit and getting back to doing some more sewing. I also don't sew much during the summer. I don't sew as much during the summer as I do during the winter, and I miss it. Right now, I'm smack in the middle of canning season. I made 7 quarts of pie filling with the apples from our Lodi apple tree on Friday. I've been throwing tomatoes into zip gallon bags and putting them in the freezer for making tomato sauce and salsa later in the season. I usually do that in October, and I'm harvesting the beans, the corn, and the last of the zucchinis, so it's a busy time in the garden. I taught my thread class last week at the quilt store, and I had 5 students, including the store's sewing machine tech. He sometimes pops in and takes classes, and I really like having Ryan in the class because he asks a lot of good questions. I really think that's my favorite class to teach because it's just full of aha moments when you can see the light bulbs going on in people's heads. And I love that the students get fearless about testing out different stitch patterns and trying things on their machines. I had one lady who made all of her thread samples after she programmed her machine to sew her name on her fabric. So that was really cool. She had personalized thread samples sewn in her name. I love it that students leave that class knowing a lot more about thread structure, thread weights, what different kinds of threads are suitable for, and they leave being educated consumers knowing that their next project is going to feature exactly the kinds of threads that they like. At the end of September, I'll be teaching Gail Yellen's Christmas stocking pattern at that same store. And if you have a serger or a cover stitch or both, and you want to try out a really fun pattern, get that pattern from Gail Yellen's website because it'll take you through making flatlock stitches and weaving ribbon through flatlock stitches. You'll learn how to make serger fringe. If you have a cover stitch, you'll do decorative chain stitches and stacked cover stitch. Gail has some accompanying videos to go with those techniques, and you will learn a lot and make a lovely Christmas stocking in the process. I don't know if I remembered to mention that I'm teaching again at Sew Expo in Puyallup, Washington at the end of February and the first week of March of 2025. I have 6 classes on the schedule. Most of them are knitting classes, but I'm also teaching the thread class there. So if you are in the area or you want to travel to the greater Seattle metro area, Puyallup is southeast of Seattle. It's a great event, and there are just tons and tons of classes. I think I mentioned that some of my cousins' children are having children of their own, and I've been making baby quilts for the new grandchildren for my cousins. Although I got a little bit behind, and I never made one for the oldest of those grandchildren, and she just had a little sister born at the beginning of August, so now I'm really behind. So I'm making an I Spy quilt for the older one and a baby quilt for the new baby, and I've been working on those this week, and that's been a lot of fun. I also found a quilt sandwich. It's a quilt block that I wanted to try out, and so I would call it either a wall hanging or a table topper. It was done in Christmas fabrics. I wasn't 100% thrilled with it when it was done, but it was basted into a quilt sandwich, and I thought, I'm just going to sit down at the Q20 and quilt this. So rather than do anything intricate, I got out my red, white, and green variegated holiday thread, and I quilted loops all over it, and I'm doing ribbon candy in the border. And it is one of those quilts where I am embracing the philosophy that finished is better than perfect. I will put a binding on it, and it might go to the Ritzville Mennonite Central Committee relief sale in October if I don't sell it at our craft co-op sale at the end of September. I belong to a sewing group that meets on Thursdays at the community center, which is a few miles up the road from my house. And the sewing group formed a cooperative about, 15 years ago maybe. And they formed the cooperative because they were all making all of these items to sell and had no outlet for selling them. So the cooperative puts on an annual sale at the end of September every year. It's always the weekend after our Flathead Quilters Guild quilt show. The first few years, I think the sale was held at the community center, and it outgrew the community center. It was held at our elementary school for a couple of years, and then it moved to the Mennonite church where I am the pianist. And the sale started out in our fellowship hall, but again, it quickly outgrew the fellowship hall. And a couple of years ago, I suggested that we move the quilt display into the sanctuary. So now the quilts are on display on the backs of the pews, and that freed up a lot of space in the fellowship hall for us to have other items. So that's worked out really well, and it makes a beautiful display when all of the quilts are out. I am a member of the craft cooperative, but I am really undecided about whether or not I'm going to participate in this year's sale. There are women in our group who churn out just a tremendous amount of quilted items, hand-sewn items. We sell everything. We've got one lady who does book art with old books. She folds the pages in such a way that she makes beautiful three-dimensional pictures out of them. It's hard to describe. I'll see if I can put a picture up in the show notes. We've got people who crochet, people who knit. One of my friends is a nationally known artist, and she sells her paintings. We've had photography. You name it, we have it. I have not quite managed to get my sewing production under control for a lot of reasons. Most of my sewing in the past couple of years has been concentrated in garments because I was doing a big closet makeover for myself. Mostly what I sell at the craft co-op sale are pot holders because my pot holders sell really, really well. And I make a lot of them. Basically, what I do is I quilt a big, gigantic quilt sandwich on my Q20, on my Bernina. And then I cut that gigantic quilt sandwich into potholder-sized pieces and I bind them. My potholders have a layer of quilting cotton on the front and on the back, a layer of batting, and a layer of Insulbrite in between. And that seems to be the winning combination because whenever I sell potholders at the sale, I never come home with any. So we'll see. It's getting down to the wire. I will probably bind the potholders that I've already made and put those in the sale, but I'm not sure that I'm going to have anything else, which is fine. I go and I help at the sale because it's a lot of fun and I like to visit with people and I like to see all of the beautiful items that everybody's making. We had a day last week when it never got above 45 degrees and it rained all day, and I'll tell you, I was ready to pull out my bins full of French terry and sweater knits and start making all of my fall clothing. And today the high is going to be 88 degrees, and it's going to be in the 80s probably for the next couple of weeks. Usually September is pretty pleasant in Montana. If we can get past low temperatures and possible frosts in August, then the garden usually gets another month to grow, which is good for my tomatoes. But I am in that in-between period of time where I'm not quite sure what I should be sewing, and I think that's part of the reason I've been quilting. Quilting is pretty seasonless, but I'm thinking a lot about what I want to sew when I get my life back after gardening season. This might be an odd time of year to be making sewing goals and sewing plans, but most of my sewing really does happen from about October until maybe May. So this is going into the start of a new sewing season, and that's the way I look at it. So I've been thinking about my goals and what I want to do, and I've narrowed it down to a few things. The first is that I want to sew from my stash as much as possible. I have a ridiculous amount of fabric, and I'm not necessarily proud of that. I like to buy fabric, and when I discovered the Walmart remnant rack last year, I kind of went nuts, and I bought a lot of things that I probably shouldn't have bought. So my goal is to stay away from the Walmart remnant rack and sew from my stash as much as possible. I have beautiful fabrics that I bought not only from Walmart but other places as well, and I really need to use them because that's why I bought them. I really want to hone down my tried and true patterns and streamline my closet. Again, I've been in the midst of a closet makeover for the last couple of years because when I started sewing garments and discovered that I could buy fabric in beautiful colors that flatter my coloring. I'm a winter. I look horrible in muddy earth tones, and honestly, in the stores, there are a lot of muddy earth tones. So when I discovered that I could get fabric in hot pink and turquoise and emerald green, I went a bit nuts and completely made over my closet. I also discovered that I could make things that actually fit me because I'm taller than average and I have a fairly long torso. So everything in the stores is too short. I've spent the last couple of years making all sorts of different patterns in an attempt to find things that looked good on me and that I enjoyed wearing. And now that I've got that stable of tried and true patterns, I really want to hone that down. Last week when it was so cold, I pulled out my J. Lee Natalie top, which is a pullover with a funnel neck, crossover funnel neck. It's a really nice detail. I made that out of some French terry last year, and I wear that constantly when it's cool, and I'd like to make a few more of those. I finally perfected a blouse pattern for myself this summer, and the ones I made this summer, of course, were short-sleeved, but I'd like to make some long-sleeve variations. So really focusing in on those patterns that fit me well and that work with the fabrics that I have in my stash is one of my goals. I am signed up for Kenneth D. King's trouser drafting class at the Sewing and Design School in Tacoma in October. My only forays into pant making have been the Jaylee Renee pants, which I absolutely love, as well as the Style Arc Linda stretch pants, which once I figured out how to lengthen the rise so that they fit me well, the Linda stretch pants have been another great pattern, and I want to make more of those. But I really want to master trousers, complete with fly fronts and belt loops, and I envision making myself a pair of lined wool trousers that I can wear during the winter. That's the ultimate goal. We'll see how close I get to that, but I'm hoping that the trouser drafting class will help. I have kind of an odd shape in that I have a high hip curve. My hip bones are pretty high up, so that the widest part of my hip is only about 5 inches below my waist, and on most people, the average is about 9 inches below the waist. So getting pants to fit me is tricky. I absolutely hate. I can't say it enough times how much I hate low-rise pants. High-rise pants fit me much better, and I think it's because of that high hip curve. If I wear low-rise pants, there's nothing to hold them up because they're not at the widest part of my hips. So we will see what happens with the trouser drafting class. And even if I never make a pair of trousers, just being able to take a class from Kenneth D. King, I think is going to be amazing. And the day before the trouser class, I'm taking a coat making class from Rylas Bode. And if you haven't listened to my interview with Rylas, please do that because she's just a wonderful, wonderful teacher, and she owns the Sewing and Design School in Tacoma. So I'm going to go a day early, and she and I are going to make her princess-themed coat pattern that she's designed. When I was there at Thanksgiving last year taking a class from her, I was able to try on some of the versions of the coat that she had there, and it is just a gorgeously flattering design on so many different bodies. So I splurged on some wool and cashmere coating fabric from Mood Fabrics in a gorgeous saturated emerald green color, and Rylas and I are going to spend the day working on that coat pattern. I've also got the pattern for the American Sewing Guild. I believe it's Simplicity 9713, but I'll put the link in the show notes. It's a raincoat pattern. I have been searching for the perfect fabric to go with that pattern, and I'm getting close. Mood's got something that I think might work. And I'd really like to make that because I think that's going to be the kind of a project that I can really sink my teeth into. And I'd like to keep making bags. I really enjoy sewing on my Juki 1541, and even making the Harrelson belt bag, as many problems as I created for myself with that project, it was really a joy to sew. The noodlehead patterns they're all awesome. I have some waxed canvas fabric, and I've got some bonded nylon fabrics that I'd like to try making bags out of. I am particularly intrigued by that bonded nylon. I have a travel bag that I bought either at Land's End or LL Bean, one of those places, probably 30 years ago. And I still use it because for me, it's the perfect travel bag. At some point, it's going to disintegrate, I think, and I need to make a replacement for it. And the fabric that it's made out of is very similar to a bonded nylon. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to use one of the bonded nylons that I've gotten to recreate that bag at some point. In terms of quilting projects, I would like to keep making quilted zipper pouches. I've been doing that here and there over the summer, and that's been a lot of fun. But for a real quilt, quote unquote real quilt, I have a kit for the Alaska quilt by Laundry Basket Quilts, and I really need to finish that. I don't think my kids are going to be living in Alaska too much longer, and it would be nice if I actually made them a quilt to commemorate their 4 years in Alaska. I really don't need to do much with that quilt other than sew it together because all the pieces are laser cut and everything is ready to go, so I just need to sit that one down next to the sewing machine and work on it. I've got the Barnstar sampler book, and I'd love to make that quilt or some version of that quilt. I'd also like to do the Riley Blake Designs RBD Block Challenge for 2024. I'm intrigued by sampler blocks for some reason, and I want to make a couple of sampler block quilts. If I can figure out why Electric Quilt 8 stopped working after my most recent Mac OS update, I'd like to get back to designing some quilts in EQ8. I will never be a quilt designer, but I do enjoy playing around with block layouts, and there are some really fascinating blocks out there that I'd like to incorporate into some quilts. I think that's a good list of goals for the winter. I don't know how much I'll be able to get done, or if I get distracted by something along the way, but we'll see. And all of you can hold me accountable as we go along. I've also got a few classes scheduled locally between now and the end of the year, and I'm starting to put classes on the schedule for next year. I'm branching out a bit, and I think I might be teaching a few more quilting classes at the quilt store rather than just serger and clothing classes. I also have some ideas for the podcast, and we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the podcast. It came out September 12th last year. It's hard to believe that it's been a whole year of podcasting. I have enjoyed myself tremendously, and I have no plans to stop anytime soon. So stay tuned. We'll be having more guest interviews. Several of you have suggested possible guests to me, and I'm working on getting some people scheduled. I appreciate the feedback I've been getting. As a reminder, you can email me at janet@janetzabo.com. You can leave a review or a rating at Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the podcast. You can send me fan mail through Buzzsprout. That I can't respond directly to, but if I do get emails, I try to respond to them. The show notes are at the podcast website, which is www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. My website is www.janetzabo.com. And that has links to my blog where I post about life in Montana. So if you want to see pictures of my garden, that's the place to go. I also have a link there to my Big Sky Knitting Designs website. So until next week, happy National Sewing Month, and I hope we all get to go sew something.